Chapter number 2 of the Life of Captain James Cook, the Circumnavigator, by Arthur Kitson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 2 1755 to 1757 HMS Eagle. Notwithstanding the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle, 1748, troubles were constantly arising between the French and English, in which the American colonies of both nations took a conspicuous part, and ultimately led to open war. The first shot was fired on the 10th of June 1755, although war was not formally declared until May 1756. In June 1755 the Friendship was in the Thames, and it is said that to avoid the hot press which had been ordered, Cook first went into hiding for some time and then decided to volunteer. This is untrue, for as has been shown, he had already made up his mind and had refused Messrs. Walker's offer of the command of one of their ships, the acceptance of which would have saved him from the press as masters were exempt. He now saw his opportunity had come. He knew that experienced men were difficult to obtain, that men of a certain amount of nautical knowledge and of good character could soon raise themselves above the rank of ordinary seamen, and had doubtless in his mind many cases of those who, entering as seamen, found their way to the quarterdeck, and knowing he had only to ask the Walkers for letters of recommendation for them to be at his service, he determined to take the important step and volunteer into the Royal Navy. It must be remembered that this act of leaving employment, which to most men of his position would have seemed most satisfactory, was not the act of a hot-headed youth, no step taken in mere spirit of adventure, but the calmly reasoned act of a man of 27 years, and some 8 or 9 years' experience of both the rough and smooth sides of maritime life. Several letters were written to Mr. Walker, one or two of which, relating to a later period, were seen and copied by Dr. Young, but they fell into the hand of a niece, who unfortunately, not recognising their value, destroyed them shortly before her death, which occurred some years ago. However, it is certain that he wrote one about this time and evidently received a favourable reply, for he shortly afterwards wrote again acknowledging the service done him. Enters Navy. Having made up his mind how to proceed, Cook went to a rendezvous at Wapping and volunteered into HMS Eagle, a fourth-rate 60-gun ship, with a complement of 400 men and 56 marines, at that time moored into Portsmouth Harbour. On the muster roll, preserved in the Records Office, the following entry occurs: 161 from London rendezvous. James Cook, A.B. Entry, June 17th, 1755. First appearance June 25th, 1755. On the 24th July, that is 37 days after the date of entry into the Navy, he is rated as master's mate, a position he held till 30th June 1757, when he quitted HMS Eagle. His appointment was facilitated by the difficulty experienced in obtaining men for the service, as may be gathered from Captain Haymar's letters, who writes applying to the Admiralty for permission to break up his London rendezvous. As he says, it had procured very few men, and those only landmen. Again, he complains of the quality of the men he has received, and says he is 140 short of his complement. In another letter, "I do not believe there is a worse manned ship in the Navy. Yesterday I received from the Bristol 25 supernumeraries belonging to different ships, but not one seaman among them, but on the contrary all very indifferent landsmen. These complaints were endorsed by Captain Palliser, who succeeded Hamer on the Eagle, for he wrote that some of the crew were turned over from ship to ship so often that he was quite unable to make out their original one, they being such that none choose to own them. Of 44 said to belong to the Ramillies, she wanted only 6 the other day, but her boatswain could find out only those amongst them that he thought worth having. In the face of these deficiencies in quantity and quality of men, and remembering the good character he doubtless obtained from Mr. Walker, there can be no surprise that when Cook sailed out of an English port for the first time as a Royal Navy sailor, he held the rating of master's mate. It is usual to look upon him as an explorer and surveyor only, but a very little inquiry shows that he played an active part in some of the most stirring events in the next few years. The records of his personal deeds are wanting, but his ships saw service, and from his character it is certain that when duty called, James Cook would not be found wanting. Many of the men under whom he served have left behind names that will always be associated with the construction of the present British Empire, and with most of them he was in immediate personal contact, and obtained in every case their respect, in some their close personal friendship. Palliser commands. On the 1st of July the Eagle was ordered to fit and provision for the Leeward Islands, but having received 62 men and 53 marines, the orders were changed to cruise between Sicily and Cape Clear, and she sailed on the 4th of August. She was caught in a gale off the old head of Kinsale and received some damage, and her mainmast was reported as sprung, so she returned to Plymouth for survey and repairs. Thinking that the removal of the mast would be a good opportunity to scrape his ship, which was very foul, Captain Hamer had her lightened for that purpose, but on examination the mast was found to be in good order, and the Admiralty was so annoyed at the absence of the ship from her cruising ground that they ordered Captain Palliser to take over the command and prepare for sea without further loss of time. This he did on the 1st of October, and sailed from Plymouth on the 7th, and after cruising about in the Channel and making a few small captures, he returned on the 22nd of November, remaining till the 13th of March, and during this time Cook had a short spell of sickness, but it can hardly be called serious, as he was only in hospital for 10 days, being back to his duty on the 17th of February. In April, when off the Isle of Bass, brought to and sent on board the cutter a petty officer and 5 men with arms, provisions, etc. This extract from the log records Cook's first independent command. The cutter was one of 2 hired vessels which had joined the squadron the previous day under convoy, and the armed party was probably put on board as a precaution against privateers, who were at that time pretty busy on the French coast. Cook took her into Plymouth Sound, and he and his 5 men went on board the St. Albans, and in her rejoined his own ship on the 2nd of May, and then returned to Plymouth on the 4th of June. Palliser, in reporting his arrival to the Secretary of the Admiralty, said that he had put ashore to the hospital 130 sick men, most of which were extremely ill, buried in the last month 22. The surgeon and 4 men died yesterday, and the surgeon's 2 mates were extremely ill. Have 35 men absent in prizes and 35 short in complement, so that we are now in a very weak condition. This sickness and mortality was attributed to the absolute want of proper clothing, many of the men having come on board with only what they stood in, and some in rags, so the captain asked for permission to issue an extra supply of slops, a request that was immediately granted. Duc d'Aquitaine. After another short cruise the Eagle returned to Plymouth with Pallisser very ill with fever. He obtained sick leave, and Captain Proby was ordered to take command, but was detained so long in the Downs by contrary winds that Pallisser, who had heard a rumour of a French squadron having been seen in the Channel, shook off his fever and resumed the command of his ship, which was almost ready for sea. Every part of the Channel mentioned in the rumour was carefully searched, but no signs of the enemy were seen, and the author of the report, a Swede, was detained in Portsmouth for some months. On the 19th of November the Eagle's crew was increased to 420 men, and she was kept cruising throughout the winter, and on the 4th of January 1757 she was caught in a heavy gale off the Isle of Wight, where she had most of her sails blown out of her. On the 25th of May she sailed from Plymouth Sound in company with HMS Medway, and a day or two afterwards they fell in with and chased a French East Indiaman, the Duc d'Aquitaine, in rather heavy weather. The Medway was leading, but when getting close had to bring to in order to clear for action, as otherwise she would be unable to open her lee ports. Pallisser, on the other hand, was all ready, and pressed on, bringing the chase to action. After a hard set to, lasting about 3/4 of an hour, the Frenchmen struck, having lost 50 men killed and 30 wounded, whilst the Eagle lost 10 killed and 80 wounded, and the list of damages to the ship reported to the Admiralty shows that the action was sharp though short. The Medway was only able to afford assistance by firing a few raking shots, and suffered no damage except having 10 men wounded by an accidental explosion of gunpowder. The masts and sails of the prize were so much damaged that she lost them all in the night. One of the masts in falling sank the Medway's cutter. It was found she had a complement of 493 men, and was armed with 50 guns. She had landed her East Indian cargo in Lisbon, and then proceeded to cruise for 14 days on the lookout for an English convoy sailing in the charge of HMS Mermaid. She had succeeded in picking up one prize, an English brig, which was ransomed for £200. This was Cook's first experience of an important naval action, and Pallisser was complimented by the Lords of the Admiralty for his gallant conduct. The Duc d'Aquitaine was purchased for the Navy, and was entered under her own name as a third-rate 64-gun ship with a complement of 500 men. The Eagle returned with her consort and her prize to Plymouth, and soon afterwards Cook's connection with her came to an end. According to Dr. Kippis, Mr. Walker had interested the member for Scarborough, Mr. Osbaldiston, on the subject of Cook's promotion, but the rule was that candidates for lieutenancy must have been employed on board a king's ship for a period of not less than 6 years, and an order had recently been issued that this regulation was to be strictly adhered to. Captain Pallisser therefore wrote to Mr. Osbaldiston that Cook had been too short a time in the service for a commission, but that a master's warrant might be given him, by which he would be raised to a station that he was well qualified to discharge with ability and credit. The result of this correspondence is shown in the Eagle's muster roll, for on 27th June James Cook attended his last muster, and on the 30th he was discharged, the succeeding rolls registering D. 30th June 1757, Solebay, preferment. The Mercury Cook. At this point all the writers on Captain Cook have been led into error by following the lead of Dr. Kippis. Everyone, with the single exception of Lord Brougham, who by an evident slip of the pen puts him on board the Mersey, writes that he was appointed master of HMS Mercury. and that he joined the fleet of Admiral Saunders in the Gulf of St. Lawrence at the same time of the capture of Quebec in that ship. From the public records it has been ascertained that the Mercury was not in the Gulf of St. Lawrence with Saunders, but in the latter half of 1759 was sent to New York, thence to Boston, and was at Spithead in April the following year. The same source also shows that not only was the circumnavigator never to board the Mercury in any capacity, but in all probability he never even saw her. He is also said to have been master's mate on the Pembroke, and Dr. Kippis has him appointed to 3 different ships on 3 consecutive days. The Grampus, but she sailed before Cook could even join her. The Garland, but she was found to have a master when Cook joined, and lastly the Mercury. The explanation for this confusion, as far as the Mercury is concerned, the rest was imagination, is that there was a second James Cook in the service, who was appointed master of the Mercury under a warrant dated 15th May 1759, and entered on his duties immediately. He was with his ship at Sheerness on the 12th of July, at which time his namesake was before Quebec. On the return of the Mercury from Boston, her master was returned for some time as sick on shore, and on the 11th of June 1760 was succeeded by one John Emerton. Soon after he was appointed 3rd Lieutenant of the Gosport, his commission bearing date 1st April 1760, that is before he left the Mercury. He was with his new ship at the recapture of St. John's, Newfoundland, in 1762, with John Jervis, afterwards Lord St. Vincent, as his captain. In 1765 he was on the Wolf on the Jamaica station, and was selected by Admiral Burnaby to carry dispatches to the Governor of Yucatan. This duty he successfully carried out, and in 1796 published a pamphlet describing his adventures during the journey. On his return to England he applied to the Duke of Newcastle for the command of a cutter, and the letter is now in the British Museum, having been included in a collection in mistake for one written by his celebrated namesake. There is a certain similarity in the writing, but in the signature he writes the Christian name as Jas, while Captain Cook usually wrote Jams. The Mercury Cook was lieutenant of the Speedwell in 1773, and having had some property left him in Jersey, he received leave of absence in August. He never rose above lieutenant, and disappears from the Navy List after July 1800. A manuscript log kept by James Cook, whilst master's mate of the Eagle, is now in the possession of Mr. Alexander Turnbull of Wellington, New Zealand. End of chapter 2.